Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Roman America podcast. So, for today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different, but I think it's going to be a good one. So, make sure before we get into it, make sure to please hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. It would really help me out a lot. And so, today, we're going to do something a little different. So, as I mentioned in the last podcast episode, I went through a brief history, kind of a quick rundown of the history of the more recent history of the prime ministers of Great Britain, and basically what led to either their election losses or resignations. And as you know, of course, in the 21st century, we've had a lot of them. And as I mentioned also in the last episode, today I would be doing something special, which is I'm going to be reading the highlights of the Rape Gang Inquiry Report that was published at this point now 2 weeks ago by Rupert Lowe, who's an MP, a British MP, who, like I mentioned before, used to be a member of Reform UK before he was ultimately thrown out of the party, and he is now the leader of a new political party in Britain called Restore Britain, which started last summer as a pressure movement and is now officially a political party as of February, so as of just a few months ago. And you know, they've won quite a few local elections. They've been doing really, really good. And, you know, I really think that, I really support what those guys are doing, because they seem to be the only hope for, the future of the people of Britain. And so it's a big thing. So today I'm going to be reading the highlights of the Rape Gang Inquiry Report by Rupert Lowe. So there's approximately 219 pages in this report, so obviously I'm not going to do all of it. In fact, if you want the full version, I would strongly recommend going over to Asmongold's channel, because he did a live stream when this report was first published. Either it was the day of or the day after, and he did a live stream reading the entire report, which took, if I remember correctly, approximately 7 hours. And so, yeah, if you want the whole deluxe version, I would strongly recommend going over to his channel and checking out the live stream he did when this report first came out. Me, I'm going to be doing, I'm sort of going to be doing the same thing, except I'm not going to cover everything, because obviously that would take too long, but I'm going to cover some highlights in this report. And, it really is important to get this information out there, because what Britain's experiencing is something that America could experience, if we don't get immigration under control, and, not just illegal, but also legal as well, especially from, predominantly Muslim nations, and stuff like that. And this is something that the report highlights. And so I'm going to be reading through the report a little bit. And today it's not just going to be audio only. I will also be sharing, in this video, I will be sharing the pages themselves, so that way if you want to watch the video, you can read it as I'm reading it, or, or I can just, read it to you, depending on if you want to listen to it while you're, driving or doing something else or whatever. But in case you want to actually read the report and actually read what I'm reading, I will be posting the screenshots of those pages in this video. So this might take a little while, but it's a big one. It's an important one. So without further ado, let's get to it. All right, so let's get into it. So here is page 3 of the report. The first page is the cover, and then page 2 is basically just the table of contents. So page 3, the acknowledgments. Every witness who volunteered their testimony, whether survivor, parent, whistleblower, politician, or expert, showed courage that made this inquiry possible. Their contributions have ensured that the truth is now a matter of permanent public record. Rupert Lowe's MP's energy and commitment ensured that the Rape Gang inquiry took place. He has been unwavering in his devotion to make sure that this rotten stain on our country's history has remained firmly in the public eye. Deep gratitude is extended to the entire inquiry team, led by Sammy Woodhouse, Nate Enderby Shenton, Marlon West, Deborah Sudbury, and Julie Balin, worked tirelessly to bring this evidence together and support every survivor who came forward. A special thank you is owed to MPs Esther McVeigh, Nick Timothy, and Carla Lockhart for taking the time to sit on the inquiry panel. Dr. Mark Dury has been extremely generous in enriching the report that follows with his expert knowledge. We are also grateful to Charlie Downs, Joshua Firm, Harrison Pitt, and Graham Smith for their editorial oversight and counsel. Last but not least, we thank the untold thousands across Britain who made all of this possible by donating to ensure that this inquiry could take place. And now for the forward. Britain doesn't have a racism problem. It has an immigration problem. As this is the case with many decent, hardworking Britons, I was unaware of the sheer scale of the evil that has been and continues to be perpetrated by chiefly Pakistani Muslim men against vulnerable young white women and girls in communities up and down our country. But a single court transcript from one such horrific case, amplified by Elon Musk earlier last year, set in motion a long overdue national reckoning on the matter that inspired over 20,000 British patriots to help fund our rape gang inquiry. What follows is a comprehensive report of its findings. It is essential that all related court documents are securely preserved, both for legal and historic reasons. I am grateful to everyone on my team who has contributed to exposing this demonic chapter in Britain's history. A combination of the paralyzing fear of racism accusations and the scramble for votes from imported foreign subcultures meant that pure evil was allowed to metastasize. Nor is the horrendous ordeal over. The root cause was immigration, beginning with the British Nationality Act 1948 and escalating under Tony Blair from 1997 onwards. Believing proud nations to be responsible for the mid-20th century destruction of Europe, our post-war leaders embraced diversity and multiculturalism as the supposed civilized alternative. This report establishes beyond any doubt that this open society obsession has in fact enabled untold barbarism of its own. Oil and water do not mix, and cultural differences going back centuries are the genesis of this problem. I urge all Britons to read this report in full. Lessons need to be learned, and prosecutions need to follow for the appalling cowardice of those responsible for refusing to resist such horrors. The strongest possible penalties, up to and including death, must also be sought for those yet to be properly punished, or indeed punished at all, for their vile, unspeakable crimes. All right, so we're going to skip the introduction because it's basically the same stuff all over again. Now we're going to go to the executive summary where we start to get into the specifics. And this is some pretty interesting stuff. So, executive summary. The rape gang inquiry examined the systematic targeting of vulnerable girls, overwhelmingly white British, by predominantly Muslim Pakistani gangs across towns and cities throughout the United Kingdom. Okay. The evidence put to the inquiry confirms the scandal constitutes one of the most horrendous failures in the history of the country. Organized networks of perpetrators built coordinated operations that transported victims between locations, supplied them with drugs and alcohol, recorded abuse for distribution and blackmail, and passed girls between multiple adult men. These crimes have been committed for decades, since the 1950s by Pakistanis in particular, and have affected every region of our nation. Holy shit. Okay, this is a lot longer than I thought. I thought it was like since the 90s. Okay, the 1950s. Holy shit. Anyways, let's see here. The scale of the crimes committed is staggering. It has been previously established that at the very least 250,000 young white girls, have been subjected to repeated rape, gang rape, trafficking, torture, pregnancy, forced Islamic conversion, and lifelong trauma. The true numbers probably higher. The perpetrators bear primary responsibility, yet the institutional failures that enabled them for decades must also be confronted. In court records and official inquiries, around 87% of those convicted in those group-based child sexual exploitation cases bore distinctly Muslim names. The vast majority of the men involved in those gangs were not convicted. Dr. Taj Hargay, an imam with the Oxford Islamic Congregation, believes the true proportion of gang members who are Muslims to be around 95%. Yeah, overwhelmingly number. This figure far exceeds the Muslim share of the overall United Kingdom population. The overwhelming majority of the rape gang networks consisted entirely of men from Muslim backgrounds, predominantly of Pakistani heritage, although smaller groups from Somali, Iranian, Syrian, Turkish, and other Muslim origins were also involved. And then there's some footnotes at the bottom here, but I'm not going to click on those. I'm just going to stick to the report itself. Okay. So next page. Okay, next page. The inquiry heard harrowing testimony from survivors and their families. The method of grooming girls as young as 11 were initially befriended by a young Muslim man who then treated the child like an adult and would then start providing them with alcohol, drugs, and cigarettes. After a few months, the girls would then be collected from school gates, car homes, and streets in taxis. They were taken to houses, flats, restaurants, and hotels where they were raped repeatedly by grooms of men, tortured, filmed for blackmail, and told they were white trash or kuffar, who merited punishment. Many became pregnant while still children. Some miscarried under trauma. Others endured coerced abortions, and some gave birth to children who were later removed by the state. We found that the same unspeakable crimes occurred in at least 149 local authority districts, close to 40% of all such districts across the United Kingdom. See page 14 for a full map. And by the way, I will show the map. We're getting to it. Survivors described daily rapes, red rooms of extreme torture, trafficking between cities, and institutional belief that compounded their suffering. Some girls were even trafficked to the Middle East, where they would endure Islamic marriage. Excuse me. Damn. Yeah, this is pretty damning so far. The demographic and cultural drivers are clear. Perpetrators from Pakistani, Muslim, and other Muslim backgrounds operated under an honor and shame-based clan code that treated non-Muslim girls, especially white working-class girls, as property available for sexual use. This pattern was reinforced by 8 theological and legal aspects of Islam. These include the doctrine of Muslim superiority drawn from Quranic verses that position Muslims at the top with a duty to correct non-believers. The gang members' justification for their crimes can be found in the Islamic principles of loyalty and disavowal known as al-wala walabara. It demands enmity towards non-Muslims, the superiority of men over women, forced marriage combined with the absence of any fixed minimum age of consent, the perception of female sexuality as inherently dangerous, a system of sex slavery that authorizes sexual relations with non-Muslim captives, and a religiously sanctioned social hierarchy that subjugates conquered non-Muslims. These elements filtered through clannish immigration subcultures provided religious justification that enabled the systematic rape and even slaughter of white British girls. This is pretty damning report so far. And so I'm just gonna skip the rest of the executive summary and go straight to the map now. Okay, so here's the map. And it says right here on the map, rape gangs have operated in at least 149 local authority districts across the United Kingdom. And so in this map, the light red is, well, they're both red. The lighter red, you can probably see it. So there's 2 different shades of red. The lighter red is suspected, and the darker red is confirmed. The more solid red is confirmed. So as you can see on the map here, the majority of it is in England, which makes sense because that's where the majority of the United Kingdom's population is located, is in England, across all different parts of England. As you can see, all of London is surrounded. If you look at the, bottom right portion of the map, that's where London is. The entire city is surrounded, and then I forgot the region's name, but then towards the bottom left, towards the southwest of England, there's an entire region just east of Cornwall. So Cornwall is the southwestern tip, as you can see. So there appears to be nothing there, but the region just east of it, that entire region is suspected, and little bits of it are confirmed, it looks like. Suspected in East Anglia, suspected in, let's see here, Northumberland, I think. Is that what it is? Yeah. And then, let's see here, then in England, then up north in Scotland, as you can see. So the majority of Scotland appears to be, it doesn't appear to be quite as bad, but it's still present. There's, as you can see, there's confirmed presence in Edinburgh and Glasgow. So Edinburgh is by, I think it's called Loch Fyne, if I remember correct. It's a different loch, which is basically a British version of like a lake or a bay or something. I don't know. Man, I'd have to get out my map. Hold on. Let me just get the map out for a second. Hold on a second. Let me just get the map out for a second. Because otherwise I'm going to mess this up. Let me see. I need to get a full image of this. I was way off. It's called the Firth of Forth. That's what I remember. I remember now, yeah, because I should know this because I was in Scotland 3 years ago, which, I don't think I've ever told anyone about that, but yeah, I was on vacation in Scotland 3 years ago, so I should know that. But yeah, just south. So yeah, so that little opening in the east part of the country, there's a little opening of water that goes into land a little bit. It's called the Firth of Forth, and it's basically just their version of a bay. It's what they call a bay. And then on the bottom end, on the south end of that firth, is Edinburgh. And so it looks like, yeah. And then over to the west of Edinburgh, let's go back to the reports map. To the west of Edinburgh, then you've got Glasgow. It appears to be confirmed there. And then just above that in the Isles, the Hebrides. The Hebrides, it's a form of islands just to the west. It's just to the west of Glasgow. And then there's also presence in, is that Aberdeen? I think it looks like it. Yes, in Aberdeen. So Aberdeen is a city in the northeast. If you look at the map and you look towards the northeast portion of Scotland, you can see a little chunk of red. That's Aberdeen, which is another city there. Then you've got this separate portion from the island of Britain, which is Northern Ireland, because people forget Northern Ireland is still part of the United Kingdom. So as you can see in Northern Ireland, you've got a confirmed presence in a district that is, I don't know if it is, but it's a district either in or right next to Belfast, which makes sense because Belfast is a pretty large city. So basically in all four countries, part of the United Kingdom, you've got regions. Oh, yeah, and then I also forgot Wales. So if you go back down towards England, so the southwestern, you're going to see that southwestern portion of England is Cornwall. Right above that, sticking out, it's to the west, is Wales. So not as much presence there, but there is confirmed presence in Wales as well. So yeah, that really is kind of a bummer too. All right, now below the map, there's a little section, a little summary on London, which makes sense because that's where a lot of the British population lies, in and around London. So it says right here, London stands exposed as the epicenter of institutional denial in the grooming gang scandal. While northern towns faced public inquiries after the truth emerged, the capital maintained a wall of silence for years. The mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, real British sounding name, has repeatedly insisted there were no grooming gangs operating in the city. As our inquiry heard from Susan Hall, leader of the Conservatives in the London Assembly, the rape gang phenomenon is in fact endemic within the capital. After challenging Khan about the presence of such gangs in London, Hall was inundated with calls from women and girls purporting to be victims of their predation. Khan describes evidence from whistleblowers as malicious and politically motivated. He told the London Assembly that the problem was far more complex than in other parts of the country, and that young people were being exploited through county lines rather than organized, group-based child sexual exploitation. These statements were made despite the Metropolitan Police holding reports of young girls being plied with alcohol and drugs, then raped by groups of men in hotels and other locations across the capital. A Daily Express investigation revealed that Khan had direct access to HM Inspectorate of Constabulary, constabulary documents detailing the exactly these patterns of offending. He read the files yet continued to deny the existence of grooming gangs in public. Shadow Home Secretary Chris Phillip, MP, has accused Khan of facilitating a cover-up, and other politicians stated that both the mayor and the Metropolitan Police have been denying grooming gangs in London. Campaigners, including whistleblower Maggie Oliver and Chris Wilde, described the capital as the last bastion of denial and warned that the scale of abuse there was more catastrophic than anywhere else in the country. So, yeah, that really makes sense. So, yeah, Sadiq Khan, real British-sounding name. That makes a whole lot of sense. That pretty much explains the cover-up, It's pretty self-explanatory. All right, so now we're going to get to some victim testimonies. So there are several of these, and I'm going to, basically, for the sake of time, I'm going to be skipping the long ones, and I'm going to be sticking to the shorter ones. But the first one is a woman named Chloe. So basically, this is the only portion that I'm going to read is basically that an inquiry panelist asked Chloe, "Do you know how many men abused you over the period if you had to guess?" And Chloe responds, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. So, that's from, and again, you could read the actual document, the actual inquiry report if you want to hear the whole thing, but it's quite a few pages. It's probably about 10 pages or so is the full her full testimony. And so, that's Chloe, and then so we're going to move on to the next one now. All right, so after Chloe, the next testimony comes from Fiona. So this one's a little shorter, so I'm going to read through this one, but pretty much same messaging. So it says, Fiona grew up in a highly abusive household marked by domestic violence, severe emotional abuse, and repeated suicide attempts by her mother, which Fiona witnessed. Despite exceptional academic ability, she developed serious mental health difficulties, self-harm behaviors, and suicidal ideation from a young age. After escalating abuse and failed disclosures, Fiona entered care at the age of 13. She was placed in a children's home that had already been identified as high risk for sexual exploitation in a television documentary prior to her arrival. Inadequate supervision meant that she was missing repeatedly. At 13, she was groomed by adult Pakistani men whom she estimates were aged between 24 and 45. The grooming began with affection and alcohol, quickly progressing to rape, drug dependency, threats, and trafficking. Care staff negligence was extreme. Abusers would sit in cars outside waiting for the girls, openly converse with staff, and even phone the home to inquire about them. One care worker told Fiona's mother that her boss had described recording the man's registration plates as above her pay grade, warning that she would lose her job if she did so. Fiona believes the staff were aware of what was happening, but felt powerless to stop it rather than being actively complicit. Nevertheless, the children's home received £5,000 per week to care. Is that pounds? Yeah, 5,000. Excuse me. Or no, it would have been euros. I'm sorry. Would have been, 5,000 euros per week to care for her and failed miserably. Fiona suspects the management avoided proper investigation for fear of being labeled racist. Only the police took any formal action, issuing harboring notices to the men, official warning stating that they had no permission to associate with, contact, or house a vulnerable child. However, no further action followed. When Fiona's mother called the police to report her daughter missing and mentioned a history of abuse by Asian men, the caller told her, "You can't describe them as Asian because that's racist. You should just be glad your child is being taught a different culture." On one occasion, a police officer returned Fiona to the house where the abuse was occurring and told the men to have fun with her. On another occasion, police instructed the abusers that if they could persuade Fiona to sign herself out of care, the police would stop bothering them. The gang tried to convince her to do so, intending to traffic her to Kashmir. She was only prevented from leaving the country because she did not have a passport. Whew, man, between 2008 and 2012, Fiona was repeatedly raped by multiple men connected to organized grooming networks. She was often kept in a house known as a party house between 10 and 20 men who would attend at one time. In one occasion, she was encouraged to bring her friends because the owner had relatives visiting from Birmingham to celebrate Eid and expected girls to be there. Within the house, the girls were routinely referred to as white slags, while the men wanted Pakistani girls kept pure for marriage. The gangs repeatedly discussed fears that the English Defense League would arrive armed, so they kept baseball bats for protection. They also allegedly spoke of attending EDL demonstrations with weapons. Fiona was not only trafficked and raped across multiple cities in the UK, but was also forced to traffic drugs. Drugs, intimidation, and violence were used to control her. She was made to clean up the knives from the scene of 2 fatal stabbings. She was present during a shootout. Her abusers bragged to her that they had hidden dead bodies in a certain location. A few days later, Fiona recalls the news reporting on a body being recovered from the same location that the abusers had close to her. As a result, threats of violence carried enormous weight. At 14, Fiona was abused by a man known as Rambo. He had entered Britain illegally in the back of a lorry. Previously castrated in Pakistan as punishment for child abuse, he then fled to the Philippines, where he allegedly attacked multiple women and children with a large knife, the origin of his nickname. Rambo was locked in a room with 2 girls and subjected them to extreme sexual torture. This case illustrated that in some instances, the sexual abuse of children was driven more by humiliation and control than by sexual gratification. At 15, Fiona became pregnant while in a mixed-sex care home. Her son was later removed and adopted due to ongoing exploitation risks, yet Fiona herself was left in the same dangerous environment. The abuse continued into her adult life. It only stopped when she turned 18, leaving her with profound physical and psychological trauma, including PTSD, substance dependency, and long-term health damage. Fiona states that the greatest harm came not from the abusers, but from the institutional belief, neglect, and punishment that actively enabled the ongoing exploitation. In total, she estimates she was abused by between 50 and 100 men. Of those, only 2 were not Pakistani. Yeah, so clearly this is a Pakistani problem, as you can see. So, yeah, and what was that last sentence? That was insane. What was that last sentence on the first page? Let me go back to it. Hold on a second. Oh, so this one was so bizarre. Only the police took any formal action. When Fiona's mother called the police to report her daughter missing and mentioned a history of abuse by Asian men, the call handler told her, "You can't describe them as Asian men because that's racist. You should just be glad your child is being taught a different culture." On one occasion, a police officer returned Fiona to the house where the abuse was occurring and told the men to have fun with her. Yeah, that's pretty insane. And this is just the first of many. Well, the second of many, sorry. But yeah, this is a lot. So then, in the testimony she gave, Fiona says, "I was beaten regularly, I was drugged, filmed being raped, and the footage was distributed. I sustained broken bones, facial injuries, and severe trauma. I was subjected to racial abuse in the community and blamed by families of perpetrators." So, this is essentially, and so that pretty much concludes Fiona's testimony. And so, now we're going to move on to the next one. All right, so next one after Fiona is Michelle. So So this is her testimony. Michelle was physically abused in childhood by both her mother and stepfather. Her mother had multiple partners throughout Michelle's childhood, many of whom also abused her, some sexually. She believes this early experience created an association between abuse and love, leaving her particularly vulnerable. From the age of 13, she was groomed by 3 adult Pakistani brothers who supplied her with alcohol, cigarettes, and drugs. She was raped while intoxicated, including one occasion where she was taken upstairs while her sister tried to intervene. Because of her upbringing, she thought this was normal, that they were her boyfriends, and that they loved her. She would go missing for extended periods and was subjected to repeated daily sexual abuse. The perpetrators would collect her from school, her home, and public places using threats of violence to coerce and control her. At age 14, she was gang raped and beaten by 3 men who had locked her in a house. She was left covered in cuts and bruises, which alerted a friend. The friend told her own mother, who then contacted Michelle's mother. The police were called, but they claimed there was little that could be done without more evidence. One of the gang members later forced Michelle to go to the police station with him to retract her statement. The police accepted him as her appropriate adult, a role normally reserved for a parent, close family member, social worker, or trained professional. The investigation was subsequently dropped. One of Michelle's friends who lived in a car home would be collected directly outside by the same gang. Care staff would call the police, but officers reportedly referred to the girls as prostitutes despite them being children. Both social services and the police, Michelle says, failed to understand the situation and believed the girls were engaging in the activity by choice. As a result, little was done to intervene. When she was abducted and went missing, no one came looking for her. A social worker once told her that at age 14 she would be allowed to live with her 30-year-old boyfriend, quote-unquote, as long as they did not share a room. Michelle was raped in bin sheds, threatened with a knife, and forced into sex with multiple men waiting in cars. She was drugged, beaten, burned with cigarettes, locked in rooms, and passed between men. An amusement arcade was used as a front for drug dealing and the sexual exploitation of children. She became pregnant 4 times as a child as a result of rape, leading to miscarriages, 1 abortion, and 1 surviving child. Of her abusers, she states 98% of them were Pakistani Muslims. If not, they were Iraqi Muslim or Kurdish. Michelle believes these gangs remained untouchable because the authorities feared being labeled racist. She describes an extensive network of abusers operating across the entire country, calling it industrial in scale. It functions as a large central network with smaller connected groups in specific localities. Michelle claims she was raped between 600 and 700 different men over the course of 3 years. She now lives with severe PTSD and lifelong trauma, describing her both her childhood and her future as destroyed. And then, at the inquiry, what would you say the main issue was? The inquiry panelist asked. Michelle, I don't think they cared much about us. They didn't want to open that can of worms because it's a religion thing. I'd probably say 98% of them were Pakistani Muslim. If not, they were Iraqi or Kurdish. And so, yeah, even though these are, and so what this goes to show is that even though this is a problem with Pakistani Muslims, it's not just limited to them. It's also Iraqi, Kurdish, Somali, Bangladeshi even. I haven't heard that so far, but Bangladeshi, that's possible. Turkish. Basically, yeah, this is a problem from the Muslim world, and it's being imported into the UK, and essentially this is not just a problem. I mean, it's not just a problem in Britain, but Britain's probably one of the areas where it's worst. And so this is just another testimony, and on to the next one. Okay, so for this next report, so this final testimony is a little bit different. So the main purpose of this inquiry report has been to basically focus on immigration, like that's supposed to be the specific referendum of this report. However, it can cover more than one topic, more than one area of discussion. And so in this one, it's a little different. in this one, the referendum isn't on immigration, it's actually on transgenderism. And it's a little bit different, but it still highlights that this can occur, this is a problem that occurs with everybody, and this isn't just an immigration issue, but it's still important to highlight. So this final testimony is from someone named Sebastian. So it says right here, Sebastian was raised in Scotland in a stable household. Sebastian's mother held down a professional job, owned her own home and car, and the family regularly went on holidays together. Despite this relatively secure background, which was not typical of abuse victims, Sebastian was raped and abused from ages of 6 by family members without Sebastian's mother's knowledge. These family members instilled in Sebastian the belief that to be safe, you had to give them what they wanted. This led Sebastian to develop a transactional view of interpersonal relationships. At age 11, Sebastian was introduced by these abusive family members to a local cafe owner. The owner gave Sebastian free food, lifts in his car, and free cinema tickets to build trust and a sense of obligation. From there, they began prostituting Sebastian out to a number of people. These included seemingly respectable professionals such as estate agents, solicitors, care support workers for children, and even police officers. Even at boarding school, Sebastian was raped, assaulted, and groomed by staff and connected adults, with Sebastian's injuries often ignored by medical professionals. All of Sebastian's abusers were white British. In adulthood and during the final years of the abuse, Sebastian became aware of the wider operation of the grooming networks, both in a quiet rural area and in the city. At the age of 40, Sebastian was finally able to escape a cycle of abuse that had lasted for nearly 4 decades. Following years of abuse, Sebastian, born a biological female, transitioned to the opposite sex and now identifies as a trans man. Sebastian transitioned socially at 41 and medically at 48. However, when describing the abuse experienced as a child, it remains important for Sebastian to recognize that these events occurred while living as a girl and perceived as such. Sebastian acknowledges that this transition was, at least in part, a consequence of the abuse experienced and feels safer from further abuse when presenting as a man. Sebastian recognizes the profound impact trauma can have on a person's life and believes that difficult people find different ways to cope. For some, that may mean choosing a particular career or relationship, or by making unhealthy choices by using substances or alcohol. For Sebastian, transition and finding peace in being Seb became the pathway to recovery. Sebastian describes healing from trauma as a form of transformation. For Sebastian, that transformation has involved a change of personal identity and finding a sense of safety never known while living as a female. Sebastian understands that others may not fully understand the paths people take to cope with trauma, but hopes that at the very least they will try to understand. Sebastian now advocates for other survivors with the aim of protecting vulnerable people and helping to develop local measures to prevent abuse. And so this really does go to show that although a lot of these crimes that have been named in the inquiry report are by immigrants, particularly of Pakistani Muslim backgrounds, it shows that grooming gangs still do to a certain extent, although I would say lesser extent, to a certain extent, they do occur amongst white British men as well, and so that is a fact. And it's also this issue is a referendum, I guess you could say, on transgenderism, because you don't really know what's going on in someone's head and why they might have gender identity disorder, and you might not know why they would want to transition from one sex to another. But what this testimony clearly shows was that transitioning was a form of cope, because this person, born a biological female, was subjected to horrific sex crimes when they were young and never felt safe in this world as a female, and so they felt like the only way to escape it was to transition to become a trans male. And this sort of underlines something about the transgenderism movement, but at the same time it also underlines that the fact that it is in effect maybe not a common one, but it still is an effect from, all of these, sex crimes committed against people, and especially when they start and finish at a young age and stuff like that. So that's about as many testimonies as I'm going to read. There's more, but I'm just going to keep moving along, and I'm going to move to the next section now. All right, so long list of testimonies from victims. So now what we're going to get to is, and there's a few of them, but I'm just going to cover one of them, is whistleblower testimony. So it says right here, whistleblowers who tried to expose their rape gangs were systematically silenced, discredited, and punished. On occasion, their careers and reputations were also tarnished. Social care professionals, campaigners, and public activists who raised evidence of still ongoing grooming, trafficking, financial abuse of children in care, and institutional cover-ups faced suspension, defamation proceedings, dawn raids, asset freezes, fabricated charges, gagging bail conditions, and career-ending isolation. Authorities assured them that full investigations had taken place when none had occurred and records were destroyed. Senior officers and elected members acknowledged concerns as credible yet took no remedial action. The state did not merely ignore whistleblowers, it punished them to protect the gangs and its own reputation. We wish to correct for that, so we invited these whistleblowers to our inquiry. Below are some of the testimonies. So for this one, I am going to just read the first one. It says, in quotes, a social worker. Our whistleblower social worker is an experienced children's social care professional with nearly 4 decades of service. Her specialized work focused on leaving care services and safeguarding highly vulnerable young people. In February 2018, she raised extensive whistleblowing disclosures concerning financial abuse of young people, misuse of public funds, unlawful sanctions, illegal evictions, racism towards children in care, and systemic failures to safeguard against sexual and criminal exploitation. She was assured that a comprehensive investigation would occur. In the event, responses were delayed, fragmented, and opaque. Senior officers later acknowledged that financial abuse was likely, but claimed proof was impossible due to missing records. Yeah, I wonder why. She was informed that shredders had been purchased at units and that records may have been destroyed. Despite this, the disclosure was deemed reviewed without her ever being interviewed. She describes repeated safeguarding failures witnessed when she was interim co-manager of semi-independent units, including children with severe mental health needs placed unsafely, repeated missing episodes, untreated exploitation risks, and delayed police or mental health intervention. Her evidence illustrates escalating harm, including self-harm, sexual exploitation, and criminal exploitation, and unlawful housing practices. After raising these concerns, she experienced retaliation, including removal of payments, suspension based on unfounded allegations, and professional isolation. Senior leadership and elected members repeatedly failed to engage meaningfully with her concerns. She concludes that the local council prioritized reputational and financial considerations over child safety, leaving ongoing risks unaddressed. So yeah, clearly these testimonies show that there were whistleblowers in these organizations and these institutions who did attempt to tackle the problem, but were stopped up front by senior members of those institutions and people in leadership positions who implemented a cover-up so as to not be accused of, racism or xenophobia of any kind. And so, yeah, this problem does go a lot deeper, obviously, but so. And then, all right, so we're gonna skip the rest of these whistleblower testimonies and just move on to the next section. All right, so important section right here. Demographics and culture. So, perpetrators from Pakistani Muslim and other Muslim backgrounds formed the core of the rape gangs nationwide. They operated under an honor and shame clan code that treated non-Muslim girls, especially white working-class girls, as property available for sexual use because these girls had no male protectors who could retaliate. The men began by showering the girls with attention, gifts, alcohol, and drugs. This then escalated to coercion, gang rape, and trafficking. They transported victims across towns, shared them with friends and family, and sometimes forced conversions to Islam followed by religious marriages. The Muslim men justified the abuse by describing white British girls as easy, trash, or morally inferior. The same network targeted Sikh girls until Sikh communities mobilized collective male protection and forced the gangs to withdraw. British girls were not permitted such as a defense. This religiously framed exploitation was repeated in every major town and city and beyond. Britain has seen a series of high-profile convictions for organized group-based child exploitation, commonly referred to as grooming gangs. However, the number of convictions amount only to a small proportion of the men who carried out the crimes. In cases where perpetrators of Pakistani heritage were named publicly in court records or reports, their names have consistently been Muslim in character. According to the 2021 census for England and Wales, around 93% of individuals identifying as Pakistani by ethnicity also identified as Muslim, with only about 1% following another religion, the remainder having no faith recorded. Researcher Peter McLaughlin in Easy Meat 2016 compiled a comprehensive list of grooming gang convictions from 1997 to 2018 with updates in subsequent analysis, drawing from published court outcomes. His examination of names indicated that approximately 87% of those convicted bore distinctly Muslim names, which was a figure echoed in related analysis, far exceeding the Muslim proportion, around 6% of the general population of Britain. The majority of these convicted groups consistently entirely of men from Muslim backgrounds. These groups are predominantly of Pakistani heritage, especially when the group exceeds 10 or more members. The larger group size dynamic of Pakistani perpetrators is on display in major prosecutions and official reviews from locations such as Rochdale, Rotherham, Huddersfield, Oxford, Telford, and others. Other convictions have involved groups primarily composed of Muslims from non-Pakistani origins, demonstrating that the issue is not necessarily confined to one ethnic group. 2 Somali origin gangs in Bristol, a mainly African heritage gang in Banbury, 3 Iranians in Chelmsford, 3 Syrians and 1 Kuwaiti in Newcastle, 2 Turkish men in Somerset, a Romanian rape gang in Rotherham, the large Newcastle Operation Sanctuary case involving 17 men and 1 woman from diverse Muslim backgrounds, Albanian, Kurdish, Bangladeshi, Indian, Turkish, Iranian, Iraqi, Pakistani, and Eastern European heritage. Nearly all published names were Islamic. These patterns are drawn from a judicial proceedings, sentencing records, official inquiries, such as those in the Rotherham, Rochdale, and others, and public reporting on concluded cases. Recent developments, including ongoing reviews and data audits, continue to examine the scale, characteristics, and patterns of such offending. So, yeah, what this does show is that although it's not just confined to Pakistanis, it's more than one ethnicity perpetrating these crimes across England and Britain in general, but especially in England. And so, and what it really demonstrates is, although it's not a Pakistani thing, although Pakistanis certainly make up a good number of them, it's a predominantly Muslim issue. And that, of course, is going to lead to the next section, which I'm going to do in the next video. So if you've stuck around this long, I applaud you for that. I thank you for that. And truth be told, I did not expect it to quite go this long, but that being said, I'm going to create a second part of this video, which I'm actually going to do tomorrow. So stick around, because part 2 will be coming out tomorrow. And so tomorrow we're going to get into, we're going to be continuing reading this report and the highlights and all that stuff. And I will be, once again, I will be showing the actual pages on the video so that you can read if you're watching the video rather than just listening to it. And yeah, but anyways, yeah, if you've stuck around this long, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And I think this is now my longest video I've ever made, my longest episode I've ever made. So really, if you can stick around to the end of this video, thank you very much. And so, make sure to, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. And like I said, part 2 will be coming out tomorrow. But for now, hopefully this gave you a good insight into the report. And thank you very much for hanging out. And I will see you all in the next episode in part 2 tomorrow.